Hi everybody, welcome back to developing a dynamic website from start to finish. This is lesson number 8, and we're calling this one just simply the database. We're going to go over the database, which is probably obvious at this point. As I've noted in pretty much all the other videos in this series, I'm assuming that you have at least some knowledge of databases, that you either came into this with knowledge or you have viewed our web databases tutorial along with our intro to PHP. With that said, if you haven't and you get lost anywhere in here, please do just pause the video, go take a look at that series and get caught up, and you'll be able to jump right in. So things we've already talked about. I keep bringing this screen up, or this slide up, every time we bring up a new video. I'm kind of eliminating or showing what we're going to do in the future and eliminating what we're not talking about yet. And at this point, we're still only talking about server-side technology for the most part. And that is outside of the HTML and CSS we've already done, but that's not new to us anymore. So sticking to the new stuff, PHP and MySQL is what we've been working on, more specifically PHP. Now we're moving into MySQL, which is also pronounced MySQL. I'm sure some tech Nazis out there know the right way to pronounce that. I've heard everybody say it one way or the other, and I usually call it MySQL. That's what I'm comfortable with, so I'm sticking with it. You feel free to call it whatever you want. Anyway, that's what we're getting into. So, who uses databases? This is kind of a broad question, and I mean it more in the sense of website related. But some of you coming in here may not understand how the quote dynamic part of all this works, and I know I did. I had a really hard time understanding that. When I was in school, we took, I don't even know if it was 2 weeks. I think it was only 1 week, which meant it was 2 lectures and 2 labs, where we talked about PHP and MySQL, or just server-side stuff in general in databases and how cool they are. And that's pretty much as far as we got. They showed us what they could do, showed us a quick tutorial on how to set something up, but that stuff was so beyond, I think, everybody in my class, which was a class of, I think, 33 of us or so. And I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure if I remember looking around and us asking each other, none of us could make the connection on how this works. We all saw how awesome it was and wished we knew how to do this. But by the end of that, quick little glimpse, all we knew was that there was this technology out there that we really wish we knew how to use, but we're not going to learn it in school, or at least not at that school. So that sucked. And for many years, I was stuck with that hurdle. What makes a website dynamic, and where is this content being stored? I had worked with software when I was a kid because I was a dork, and when I used to use my old DOS machine, the only thing I really had on there was to screw around with was QBasic, which some people may be familiar with or not. I know some of us, or some of you guys watching this, have brought up a Commodore 64 and such, so I know you know what I'm talking about. But from what I remember of that, and even just some simple Visual Basic stuff once I got a Windows computer, was the only way I knew how to get data was by writing it to a file, which was very tedious. And that wasn't the only way to do it, but that was still the only way I could wrap my head around it. I didn't understand how you could use databases. So we had to, or at least I had to write, I had to write information line by line to a file and then somehow make the program remember those lines and retrieve that data. It was a mess and a horrible way to do it. It's still a good way to do it. In some cases it comes in handy to do things that way. But majority of the time we're going to be using databases these days. And what is a database? What I've already mentioned in, I think, the last video, the best example or easiest example would be your phone's contact list. That's a database. It's a system that stores information about certain people. Basically, a unique record for everybody in your contact list. And it stores their phone number, their address, their email, whatever you put in there. And each one of those would be considered a record. My entry, when you open your phone and see Alan Quant, which I'll tell you, I get butt dialed quite a bit because the name's starting with an A. I'm sure anybody else with an A name can relate to that. When you click on my name or tap on my name or however your phone works, you'll see a bunch of information, and that information is coming from a database. It's a small database on your phone. Now, this is no different than websites that are pulling dynamic information. We're pulling it from databases. So who uses databases? I think one of the greatest examples, at least at this point, until the new next best thing comes in, Facebook. And much like your contact list on your phone, Facebook utilizes a database to store all the information about you and your friends. So there is a database. So somewhere on the Facebook servers, there's a database. And in that database, it's a table. Now at this point, I'm just speculating as to how they've set theirs up. But let's just say there's a table in there in the database called users. And in that table, there are fields. And some of the fields that you might think would be in there would be name, about me, some contact information, music interests, things like that. All the things that you see on a Facebook profile page, which I'm going to kind of break away from the slides here for a second, and we'll use the Digital Crafts Facebook page as an example. I'll hide all my jargon here. All right. So, granted, their profiles the pages in general have changed quite a bit recently. Some parts I like, some parts I don't. But let's go to about, and that's probably the best example here. All right, so let's say our hypothetical table in the database called users has a field for the username, which would be the the DigiCraft. There's probably a user ID, which is probably either a string of numbers or a very long number, or even a string of numbers and letters, or alphanumeric letters. Either way, it's unique to identify me and only me. And then there'd be an about field, and that's where this here is stored. So when I go and edit and I change whatever we put in here, it opens up the database or connects to the database and writes that information into my field or into my record, thus changing it. Same with the description, same with all this other information. The history by year, things like that. This gets into a more complicated topic, yet it's a topic we are going to get to. A very important topic, and that is relational databases, which is more or less an idea and a concept than it is an actual thing. By utilizing our database in a relational sense, we make tables that relate to other tables so that we can store multiple bits of information. Now I'm probably getting to the point where I'm confusing you, but I want to note that there is not, in our hypothetical digital craft record in the database, there is not a 2012 field and a 2008 field. There is probably a whole nother table called history where these things are written to, and they're associated to my account because there's probably a field in there called ID or user ID or something like that, and that's how it knows to sync that data from that table with my account, thus creating the relation. Now, if I've totally lost you, that's fine. Forget everything I just said and stick to the basics of what I said. We have a table, again, hypothetical. I have no idea. I don't know, for some reason, when a company is worth billions of dollars, I feel weird saying for sure how they do things. So our hypothetical Facebook database table for users has a username field, an ID field, an about field, description field, founded, email, website, etc., and probably some more. And then we get into the other stuff like photos and likes and things like that, and those are all probably just like the history, where it gets into a relation type situation where there's another table that holds all the photos and things like that. Same with comments, etc., etc. So I tend to use Facebook as one of my first examples whenever explaining how databases and websites kind of work together, because there's just a good chance that the majority of us are on Facebook, or at least were at one time. I know it's popular to get on Facebook and then delete your account when you get upset about something or for whatever reason. Sadly, as business owner and someone who does organization things like this, we pretty much have to have Facebook pages, and we're stuck in this world whether we like it or not. So anyway, so that's an example of how databases are used on the web. Now let's look at some other people who use databases, or companies, websites, etc. Google uses databases to index all the sites. We could do an entire series, probably write books and volumes and novels on Google's empire and how they store data, sort data, etc. But at the core of it, I would, again, speculate there is some sort of database, probably even, something that I wouldn't even be able to fathom. It'd probably make my head explode how they had things set up, although I would be curious, because I love efficiency, and Google is very efficient. But either way, let's just think about Google at its core. It's a search engine. Google scours the web with its little bots or spiders or whatever we call them these days, and looks for content. When it finds content that it likes, that it thinks is relevant, it indexes it, which basically means it creates a record, again speculating, into our hypothetical Google database. So let's say Google finds our website, The Digital Craft. So let's hop out of the slides here. Google gets in here, starts scouring through my code, which, since this is a new version of the website, I'm not going to show you the code because I don't remember if I've cleaned it up yet or not. I kind of launched it in a hurry. But so Google comes here and it starts looking around. First it sees, okay, this is a website that is relevant. And I don't just say that because I'm pompous and think that my website's awesome. It's going to notice right away that there's YouTube content, YouTube being owned by Google. There's just a good chance that Google's going to want to index my site because it sees all the links to Google related content. So, but what it's also going to see is the main navigation here as it reads through my code. And it's going to see these links, and it's going to see if these links are relevant. So say the About page. If it thinks this is relevant, then it's going to create another record associated with thedigitalcraft.com. And that's when you start seeing in your search when you're in your search results where there's one big listing and then a couple tiny ones that seem kind of associated with it. And let's see if we can do that with mine. If I can't, I'm going to be a little disappointed. Okay, so this is what I meant. Now, sadly, this is outdated. Google has yet to scour the web and find my new website, which is something we'll talk about later when we get into search engine related stuff. But it finds the main site and then shows other web pages on the site that it feels are relevant, like my blog, some of the videos that were watched more often than others, things like that. And then you can go ahead and click on more results and it'll show you, just a ton. All of these are digital craft related. That's another example. Somewhere in Google world and their servers, there is our hypothetical database that has an entry for thedigitalcraft.com where it stores each one of these pages, or a link to each one of these pages, and maybe even the snippet. How they do it, I don't know. But hopefully you're getting the point here. So again, who else uses databases? We already kind of hinted towards it, but YouTube, of course, uses databases to store all the information for their videos. Now, this brings on an interesting point, and it's kind of a sidebar, and I'll do my best to not get into I'll try my best to not go off on a tangent here. But if we venture back to our website, The Digital Craft, I'm going to note that I am using databases. I am using a database on this site. However, I'm utilizing it very minimally. I'll tell you right now, for one, all the videos on this site are not being pulled from my database. They used to be on the old site. I did that for particular reasons, but I found more clever ways to get away with not having to do that, which just keeps content more up to date. Now these quotes here that are from you guys, the viewers, even though these are from YouTube, I've handpicked these and I have saved them on a database. If I just pulled random content, if I just pulled random comments from our videos we wouldn't always get top-notch results. Some people are a little rude, some are a little too funny, and some are crude, which I can handle crude. But at the same time, I don't want to, I want to keep this website as available to all ages as possible. So, what I wanted to get into, without going into a tangent, is that I'm pulling this information straight from YouTube. I think it's probably obvious by now that if I click on one of these, the player that shows up here, that is YouTube. That is definitely coming from YouTube. You probably already knew that, or at least if I would have asked, you would have figured it out. However, these listings, all these results here, I'm using what's called an API, and we'll get into that, and I'll even get into the definition and spell out the acronym for you later. But in layman's terms, an API allows me to, or a developer, to go in to somebody else's service, in this case YouTube, and access data from them. Now, not many years ago, that would have been something that would never have been free. This would have been something that people would charge tons of money for, to get access to this data. But that was before advertising was key. And people started realizing that getting users to come to your website and view ads is a much better plan than trying to charge users and or the little guy to use your service or utilize things like pulling the data and putting on your website. Because the little guy, even us, the developers, we may make decent money, but we don't make Google money, and we don't make necessarily advertiser money unless we're a firm. So they don't go after us. They allow us to access the content free. I'm using the same thing here, I won't lie. I'm giving you guys a ton of free information, videos after videos. I think we're almost pushing 80 videos now. A lot of these videos go up to an hour long. And what does that get for me? Well, I make money on some of these ads. Now, I won't lie. They don't make me very wealthy. And I haven't actually utilized them in the best sense up until recently. And I also just recently started putting ads on the videos themselves, which was really just an effort to get some more funding coming in. But I'll tell you, we could be doing better in that front. But if you get what my point is, would you come watch my videos if I charged you even a dime per video? The hassle of getting that dime to me, going to your PayPal account, putting in your credit card information, whatever, be it a dime, be it $1, be it $10, whatever, it's a pain. And for me to ask you to do that for everything, or to charge you monthly, things like that. Not that it's a bad business model for some businesses, but for someone like me who has no capital, and I do this out of, more of paying my respects to the other people who did this when I was learning. I offer this for free. In return, I do make some money advertising. I don't go after the little guy, and that's no offense, guy or gal. I'm going to make less money charging my users because, for one, I'm probably going to lose 70% of them just because I'm charging. So I either need to charge a lot in order to make money, or I'm just not going to make that much money and I'm not going to get very popular. Or I go after the big guy. And the big guy would be whoever can afford these Google ads. So it's just a marketing strategy. It's an easy one, and it's pretty harmless as long as you don't screw people over. I'm not going to spam you. I'm not going to let you guys get advertisements that are going to give you a bunch of garbage. And I don't advertise porn and things like that, yada, yada, yada. But hopefully you can get what I mean. I have started to rant, not necessarily rant, but ramble on, but I wanted to kind of give you insight into that. And that's because that's why Google and other companies, Facebook included, Twitter, all these big companies, they allow you to take their information for free. As long as you know how to read their documentation and understand it, which most of them have it pretty well laid out. If they're a big company, you can bet, or at least hope, that their documentation is very, very good. Google is one of the best. Facebook's is very good too. Pulling information from both those websites is it's tricky. It's like learning a new language to some degree, but at the same time, it's pretty cool. So Google allows me to advertise them all over my website. I mean, every single link on here, or at least 90% of them, I would say, all go back to Google in one way or another. Either that, or you're at least seeing Google ads, which Google gets kickbacks from their advertisers. I may make 10 cents every time an ad is seen. Google's probably making 50 cents, things like that. So, either way, main point, I just wanted to explain how I'm getting data and that there's other ways than databases to get data. And hopefully that doesn't veer us off of our topic too much. And maybe to pull us back on track, I'll note what I just said was a little incorrect. I'm pulling data from YouTube, and that doesn't mean I'm not pulling data from a database. I'm pulling data from YouTube's database. They're allowing me access. An API is pretty much giving you the keys to their database with limits that they set. So I'm still essentially pulling everything from a database. However, for the database on the digitalcraft.com itself, right now it's pretty much just these comments that I've kind of handpicked and put in, because there really isn't much more to my site than the videos at this point. So back on track. Who uses databases? Me, as we just discovered. I use these on a daily basis. I don't think I've had a website client in at least 2 or 3 years where I have not used a database at least in the slightest bit for them, whether they even knew it or not. And that's because I choose not to take on jobs that are static websites, which are they're kind of a nightmare, and they're not the kind of websites you want to do, especially if you're doing this work on your own. They are a maintenance nightmare and a money pit. If you learn how to use these tools, these dynamic tools, MySQL, PHP, or the alternatives like ASP and MSSQL and all the other database web programming languages out there, then you're going to save yourself a lot of headache, as well as the client. So lastly, who uses web databases? You. Now you're going to use them. And I can almost guarantee you that if you finish this series with us, by the end of it, you will find it really hard to make a website without a database. Even if you're just making a simple website for yourself, you're probably going to put a database in there just because it's just the way you do it. making a static website anymore, even a static web page. That might be pushing it, but either way, I just wanted to throw that quick in there. So I want to give you a quick reminder this is from our last video. This was pretty much the last slide, I think, where I showed you what a database table might look like. And this was an example of kind of a contact list database in table form, where you have, I want to refresh you on the terminology here. If you look at it like a table, and by table I mean kind of spreadsheet-esque, there are columns and there are rows. A lot of people, depending on how they learned, will refer to them as columns and rows. When I learned how to use databases, I learned them in high school, in a trade school that here in town would allow juniors and seniors who wanted to learn kind of things that the regular high schools couldn't teach. We were given an opportunity to leave and spend half the day at a trade school, so that's what I did. And we learned a bit about databases there, starting with DBase, which is still used, I think. Probably not as widely as it used to be. The one we were using was a DOS base, so I can tell you something. But so I learned how to make databases, but not really with web in mind, or really anything in mind. I understood the concept. We're storing data. This is cool, but why? But more importantly, I bring that up because the terms that stuck with me were fields and records. I don't remember them necessarily referring to records as rows and fields as columns. So that's up to you. For you to know, though, I'm going to most likely refer to a row as a record and a column as a field. So don't get tripped up on those terms. They're interchangeable for the most part. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna kind of switch to my video camera, and hopefully this doesn't screw me up. I'm gonna try and talk and write, but the camera's a little distance away from my microphone, so we'll try and make this work. But last time, or in the last videos that I talked about databases, which was another series, I used, I think, Illustrator to kind of map out our database, and that was more just to keep things clean and legible. This time I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to show you how I would normally do it myself, and that is I would use a whiteboard. Granted, I would use a bigger whiteboard than one that fits on my table, but we'll get the gist of it here. Whiteboards allow you to kind of doodle, if you will, and sometimes databases require some doodling, erasing, brainstorming, and such. So we're going to switch over to that view. Now I will note what we are about to do here, you can really do however you want. This is a planning technique or planning situation. Use piece of paper. Draw on your wall. I don't care. Most people, I think, would prefer a whiteboard or something like that. Or write it out in a Word document. I don't care. However you want to do this part of it is up to you. It only matters when it comes down to actually creating the database. If you want to use my method, which I'm going to show you here on the whiteboard, you are more than welcome to. I'm sure, I haven't really worked with a lot of other people that, I haven't seen this process done by a lot of other people, even though I've been doing this job for quite a while now. I've usually been in charge of the team, so we've always done it my way, which now that I think of it, I kind of missed out on seeing how other people might do it. But anyway, the first thing I do is I'm going to think of our table name, which we'll keep it simple, and we'll call it pages. And just kind of do that. Now I do this thing that I've kind of evolved over the years, and that is I come up with my field ideas and I put them into 3 different columns. Hopefully you can follow along with me and understand. I'm going to start putting down fields, and then I'll kind of explain the gist of why I lay them out this way. It really doesn't matter. You can lay them all out in stacked on top of each other in one column. It's up to you. Like I said, how you do this is up to you. But if we're going to have a page table, and again, this is to load the content that we already have. We have it sitting in a folder called content in its own individual document, and we're loading it that way. And what we want to do, the goal here, is to take that and move it to a database. So we eliminate the content folder, and now we start accessing a database to pull that information, all that HTML, so on and so forth. So first thing we need to do, if you haven't noticed, and I haven't brought it up enough, is we need an ID. We need a unique ID for each record. So we need an ID field. Next thing that would be good is a name for the page. And this name will be more for our own reference, kind of in the back end. It may not be seen on the user side, and that'll make more sense here a little bit later. So we need a name field. Now, to get even more confusing, I'm going to have a label field as well. Or actually, let's call it title. So we have a title field. Now, there's a big difference between the two of these. Name is going to be a name that we refer to ourselves as the developers in the back end. This may be written out differently than the way we want it written out on the front end. Title is going to be the actual title of the page, which shows up at the top of the browser in the title field, or title tag, which shows up potentially at the top of the page or the content area, maybe as an H1 tag, so on and so forth. So this may be different than the actual name of the page. Really quick, switching back to the computer. If we look at our website and we click on one of our links, if you remember, we utilize the URL to figure out what page we're loading. Page equals gallery. This right here is what we would use the name column for, or the name field. This is not necessarily what we want to pull up. This right here, gallery page, would be what we would consider the title. So you can see how it'd be a little different. We want to format it differently, we want to make capital letters and so on and so forth. But for the identifier here, we want to use a simpler term, all lowercase, something like that. And hopefully that clears that up for the moment. Now back to the whiteboard. The next field we need to consider and we'll kind of go back and forth from looking at the whiteboard to looking at the page. Is that all the content of the page? And when I say the content of the page, now I'm eliminating this title here from the content. To me, at this point, this is the content. Everything else on the page. And what I tend to use to refer to that in the database is the body. So the body, that's where all this text goes, all these paragraph tags, etc., images, things like that. Everything that's going to go in the content area is going to go in that body field. So the last things we're going to add, these are things that I add almost every time I create a table in a database, whether I know what I'm going to do with them or not. And that is a status field. And a type. Now status is going to be what we consider a Boolean data type, which is pretty much an on or off, yes or no, 0 or 1. What we might use status for in this case is whether the page is visible or not. Do we want to take it off the website temporarily? If so, turn the status to 0. Something like that. You never know when you might want to use that. So that's why I usually add it no matter what. For any table I make, I just put it in there unless I absolutely know I'm not going to use it, which is pretty rare. And the same with type. Now type is a little different. Type is usually, it's going to be a numeric, or what we call an integer, which you're going to notice once we get into the actual database end of things and building the database, is that type might refer to what type of page is this. And let's say right now we can already see we have home, gallery, blog, contact us. To me, right here, I can see 3 different page types. Home and contact us could essentially be the same page. Could essentially be the same type of page. Just a page with general content, some paragraphs, images, etc. Nothing fancy. Now a gallery page is something totally different. It's going to need to have a bunch of images that are being pulled from the database and done in a different way than pulling, a single image or a couple images on the home page or contacts page. So I could see that as being its own page type. Blog too. Blog could be its own page type. And we would utilize, most likely here, a relational situation here, where the type would just be a number, and let's say, hypothetically, page type 1 is just a general content page, home and contact us. So both of those would be a page type 1. And then gallery would be a page type 2. And then, as you guessed, blog, page type 3. And the reason we do this, if we do it, is when we load a page, we'll figure out what type of page it is, and that tells PHP and the browser what to load. Whether to load a gallery, a blog, or just some general content. And that may not make total sense yet, but you'll get the gist of it here soon. And lastly, before we wrap this video up, I want to explain my idea or the reason why I cut these into 3 columns usually. As stated over here, status is a Boolean. True or false, yes or no, on or off. Every once in a while it's not a Boolean. I might have a couple different. Status 1 might mean disabled. Status 2 might mean enabled, meaning the page is being used. Status 3 may mean deleted or trashed. That would be a way to delete a page from your own view in the admin panel, which we'll get to. But your own little control panel on making or editing your website, that may be a way to take it out of the list temporarily. If you ever want to bring it back, you decided I did not want to delete that, you can always, maybe make a deleted section where you pull up only the deleted pages and simply change that status to a 1 or a 2 and bring it back to the main list. I'm the type of person that doesn't delete anything. I'm a data hoarder, we might say. That'd be evident if you saw the amount of hard drives I have acquired. I've kept things I've done since I was a kid, before we even had hard drives, all the way up till now. I save pretty much every client's work that I've worked on since I started professionally, things like that. It's not a bad way to handle things, but it can get a little expensive and tedious organizing it all. Anyway, point being, you should never delete anything unless you absolutely know you'll never need it again. Just put it somewhere else. Get it out of your way. Just like spam, that's why your email programs kind of change the idea of deleting, and when you hit the delete key, it tends to send it to a trash folder by default instead of actually deleting it. And that's because it's really easy to accidentally hit delete on an email or something that's very important, and all of a sudden it's gone. It's gone for good. And sometimes that's not good. So that's just one example. So that's why I bring that up for status. But anyways, back on point. The 3 columns here. I reserve this column here for Booleans or similar. Status kind of has its own rules sometimes for me. Name, title, body. This middle column I generally reserve for more text related data, more of the data that a user is going to see, things like that. And again, these, I want to remind over and over that this is just my own way of writing it out and how I keep things separated in my mind before I go make the database. And the first column here I use for IDs. And you might think, well, yeah, you've got your ID here, but what about type? Type's not an ID. Yes, it is actually an ID. It's considered what we would call an index. Type is going to store the ID of something elsewhere. We might have another table called, really quick here, page types. And it'd be a simple table where each page type would have an ID and a name. And all that allows us to do is associate whatever ID number or whatever number you put into type here. We can then go ahead and query the page types and find out, well, that's a blog, or that's a general content page, so on and so forth. And that right there, in a very simple instance, you've just witnessed a relation in a database. It gets a little more in depth than that later on, but I think that's enough knowledge for this video. What we're going to do in the next video is actually create the database, so we get to get our hands dirty again. And at this point, I want to strongly suggest, if you haven't already, which you probably would have needed to if you're following along so far, is have created a server on your computer if you're knowledgeable enough to do that. And if you did, you need to make sure you have MySQL installed and phpMyAdmin, because that's the tool we're going to use. If you went ahead and got the free hosting from us, you're going to have those tools at your disposal already. If you get hosting from anywhere else, if you feel like you want to pay for your hosting to get a little more features, odds are you're going to have access to MySQL and phpMyAdmin, unless you decided to purchase a server or a hosting account that was ASP and Windows based. Then you might have a little bit of an issue. So in that case, we would then again suggest go ahead and purchase, or well, pick up a free account from us for at least this, and then decide if you need to change the hosting you bought to be a Unix or Linux based hosting focused with PHP and MySQL rather than Windows. It can be a little confusing, which is something maybe we'll talk about later. But anyway, I think that's enough for now. And like I said, when we come back to the next lesson, we'll start talking about how we take this and put it into we actually create the database and make this and put in some data, and potentially even retrieve that data depending on how far we get. So thanks again for watching, everybody. We'll see you in the next video.